The letter arrived just before sunrise. Folded. Stamped. Official. The kind of letter ranch owners never enjoyed receiving. Elias Boone stared at it from across the kitchen table. Not touching it. Not yet. Because after 48 years on the frontier, he had learned something. Bad news never improved with reading. The coffee beside him had gone cold. Outside, the ranch slowly woke beneath the Texas dawn. Workers crossed the yard. Horses moved inside the corrals. The wind carried dust through the valley. Life continued. Unfortunately, the letter wasn't going away. Finally, Elias picked it up, opened it, and read. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. The kind that settles into a man's bones. Interesting. Very interesting. Because by the time he reached the bottom of the page, the widowed rancher understood exactly how much trouble he was in. A lot. He folded the letter carefully, then stared through the kitchen window, toward the land. His land. Thousands of acres stretched across the horizon. Pastures, corrals, water wells, fences. Everything his family had built over 2 generations. Everything his late wife had helped create. Everything now at risk. The law was simple, cruel, but simple. A disputed claim on part of the Boone property had resurfaced. And without a legal family partnership registered before the county deadline, the state could divide significant portions of the ranch. 30 days. That was all he had. 30 days to solve a problem he couldn't solve. The rancher rubbed his face slowly. Tired. Very tired. Not physically. Emotionally. His wife, Margaret, had died 2 years earlier. The grief had become quieter, but never smaller. People always talked about healing. They rarely talked about remembering. Elias remembered everything. The way she laughed. The way she organized the ranch books. The way she always knew when he was worried before he said a word. The empty chair across the table reminded him every morning. Today was no different. A knock interrupted his thoughts. 3 quick taps. Then the door opened. Without waiting. Only one person on the ranch did that. Samuel Reed. Foreman. Friend. Occasional nuisance. The older man stepped inside carrying a ledger, then immediately noticed Elias's expression. Bad. Elias slid the letter across the table. Samuel read. His eyebrows climbed higher with every line. Then he whistled softly. A bad sign. Samuel only whistled when things were serious. 30 days. Elias nodded. The foreman sat heavily, thinking, calculating, searching for solutions. After several minutes, he found none. That was also a bad sign. Finally, Samuel looked up. You could remarry. Silence. The suggestion landed awkwardly. Very awkwardly. Elias stared at him. Samuel shrugged. I'm just saying. The rancher looked back toward the window, toward the empty horizon, then toward Margaret's chair. No. The answer came immediately. Too immediately. Samuel noticed. Of course he did. You don't have many options. Another silence. Because that part was true. Unfortunately. Outside, a wagon rolled across the ranch yard. Workers shouted to one another. Life continued, unaware that the future of the ranch hung by a thread. Hours later, Elias left the house. The letter remained folded inside his coat pocket. A constant reminder. The ranch needed repairs. A fence line needed inspection. A water pump needed attention. Work always existed. Problems didn't care about legal deadlines. Unfortunately, legal deadlines cared about everything. The rancher crossed the yard, passing the cookhouse, the stable, the supply shed. Then something caught his attention. A woman carrying 2 heavy buckets. Interesting. Very interesting. Because most workers would have carried 1, not 2. The woman moved steadily. Without complaint. Without hesitation. Without asking for help. Her name was Clara Whitmore. At least officially. Almost nobody used it. Not anymore. People called her something else. Something Elias disliked. Something she'd endured for years. Lot 18. The nickname came from a labor auction record long ago. A number written beside her name after her parents died. The number had survived. The people who invented it hadn't. Yet somehow the cruelty remained. Funny how that worked. Clara continued walking. Past younger workers. Past stronger workers. Past people doing half as much work as she was. None seemed to notice. That wasn't unusual. People rarely notice the person who keeps everything running. Not until they're gone. The rancher watched her disappear toward the laundry building, then continued on. A few minutes later, he reached the stable. The conversation waiting there immediately soured his mood further. 2 workers were talking. Loudly. Carelessly. He's gonna need a wife. Laughter followed. Another worker smirked. Maybe he'll marry Lot 18. More laughter. Several men joined in. The joke spread quickly, because bad jokes always do. Elias stopped walking. The laughter faded. Immediately, one look from the ranch owner was enough. The workers suddenly became fascinated by their boots. Interesting. Very interesting. The rancher said nothing. Not one word. He simply walked away. But the joke followed him. Not because it was funny, because somewhere beneath the stupidity, a possibility had appeared. One he hadn't considered. One he immediately rejected. Then considered again. That evening Clara worked alone inside the cookhouse, cleaning after supper. The last lantern burned softly above the sink. Outside, darkness settled across the ranch. Most people had already gone home. The door opened unexpectedly. Clara looked up, surprised. Elias Boone stood there, silent, thoughtful, apparently uncertain how to begin. Interesting, very interesting, because ranch owners rarely visited the cookhouse after dark, especially not for conversation. Clara dried her hands, then waited. The rancher removed the folded letter from his coat, placed it gently on the table, and for the first time in 2 years, Elias Boone asked a question he never imagined asking, one that would change both their lives forever. The question remained between them. Heavy, unexpected, almost impossible. Clara stared at Elias Boone, certain she had misunderstood. The ranch owner stood beside the table, waiting, apparently uncomfortable. That alone was unusual, very unusual, because Elias Boone was not a man easily rattled. Yet here he stood, avoiding eye contact, studying the lantern instead. The silence stretched. Finally Clara spoke, carefully. What exactly are you asking? The rancher exhaled slowly, then pushed the folded letter toward her. You can read it. Clara hesitated. Most people didn't know she could read. She rarely mentioned it. The frontier had strange opinions about educated women, especially poor ones, especially women like her. Still, she unfolded the document and read. The room grew quiet again. Interesting, very interesting, because the further she read, the more impossible the situation became. 30 days, a legal deadline, a disputed land claim, and one solution everyone seemed determined to suggest: marriage. When she finished reading, Clara carefully folded the letter again, then placed it on the table. Neither spoke. For several moments, only the lantern crackled. Then Elias finally said it. I need a legal partner. The words sounded awkward, as though he'd practiced them. Failed. Then tried again. Clara looked at him. You need a wife. The rancher winced slightly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because she was correct. And they both knew it. The direct version simply sounded worse. A lot worse. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, a habit she had noticed before, usually when he disliked a conversation. I suppose I do. Silence. Then Clara asked the obvious question. Why me? A fair question. Perhaps the fairest question in Texas. The ranch owner looked toward the dark window, thinking, searching for the right answer. Eventually he found one. Because I trust you. The statement surprised her. Completely. Trust. Nobody had used that word regarding Clara Whitmore in a very long time. Most people trusted her work. Not her. There was a difference. A large difference. The rancher continued. You've been here 6 years. Clara nodded. True. 6 years. Longer than most workers stayed. Longer than many marriages lasted. Elias folded his arms. You've never stolen. Another pause. You've never lied. Another. You've never quit. The cookhouse felt strangely smaller. The lantern cast soft shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Clara listened, unsure what to do with the words, because praise feels uncomfortable when you aren't accustomed to hearing it. Finally, she looked down. And if I say no? The rancher surprised her again. Then nothing changes. Interesting. Very interesting. No pressure. No threats. No promises. Just honesty. The answer somehow made the proposal harder. Not easier. Because now she couldn't dismiss it. Elias moved toward the door, then stopped. The offer isn't about love. The statement sounded almost apologetic. It isn't about replacing Margaret. His late wife's name lingered softly in the room. Respectfully, Clara nodded. She understood. Everyone on the ranch understood. Margaret Boone had been loved. Deeply loved. The ranch owner continued. It's about saving the ranch. Then he left. Just like that. No deadline. No demand. No dramatic speech. The door closed behind him, and Clara found herself alone. with a proposal she never imagined receiving. The following morning, she woke before sunrise. As always, the routine helped. Work always helped. Laundry needed washing. Bread needed baking. Supplies needed organizing. Tasks were simple. People were complicated. Unfortunately, people seemed determined to become even more complicated, because by breakfast, the rumors had already begun. Interesting. Very interesting. The speed was impressive. Terrifying, but impressive. Clara entered the supply yard carrying a basket. Conversation stopped immediately. A bad sign. People only stop talking when the person they're discussing arrives. Several workers suddenly became fascinated by a wagon wheel. Others examined fence posts. One man studied absolutely nothing. Very carefully. The woman sighed. She already knew. Word had spread. Of course it had. Across the yard, two ranch hands whispered. Neither very quietly. Can you imagine? Laughter followed. The second man grinned. Boone marrying Lot 18? More laughter. Clara kept walking. Head high. Expression calm. The same way she'd survived most of her life. The trick wasn't ignoring cruelty. The trick was refusing to carry it. Unfortunately, cruel words still leave bruises, even when nobody sees them. Later that afternoon, the town proved even worse. Elias needed supplies. The general store needed payment. And Clara happened to be nearby when the rumors reached Main Street. By then, everyone knew, or thought they knew. Frontier towns rarely cared about the difference. The barber discussed it. The blacksmith discussed it. Even people with no connection to the ranch discussed it. One woman laughed openly. He's desperate. Another nodded. Imagine marrying a housekeeper. A third smirked. Not even a proper lady. Interesting. Very interesting. Because none of them knew Clara was standing 3 feet away. Until they turned and saw her. The laughter vanished immediately. Embarrassment appeared. A little. Not enough. People looked away, suddenly fascinated by shelves and storefronts. Clara quietly finished her errands, then left town, without saying a word. That evening she sat alone behind the cookhouse, watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange across the Texas horizon. Beautiful, quiet, honest. Unlike people. Footsteps approached. Steady footsteps. Familiar footsteps. Elias. Of course. The ranch owner stopped beside the fence. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt less awkward than before. Eventually Clara asked, how many women refused? Interesting. Very interesting. Because the answer arrived slowly. 7. The woman blinked. 7. That was more than she expected. The rancher stared toward the horizon. One wanted half the ranch. A pause. Another wanted cash. Another pause. Most just wanted someone else. The honesty surprised her. Again. Then Clara asked the question that truly mattered. The one she'd carried all day. If we do this? Silence. Elias waited, listening. If we do this? She looked toward him. Will people ever stop calling me Lot 18? The rancher didn't answer immediately, because some questions deserve thought. Real thought. Finally, he met her eyes. And for the first time since the conversation began, his voice carried certainty. I can promise one thing. The wind moved softly across the ranch. The last sunlight touched the hills. And Clara waited, because suddenly the answer mattered more than she expected. Then Elias Boone spoke, and what he said would change everything. The answer came the following morning. Simple, quiet, unexpected. Clara found Elias near the horse corrals. The ranch owner was repairing a broken fence, a task he could have assigned to someone else, but often did himself. The woman approached slowly, carrying a basket of tools. The wind moved across the Texas plains. Neither spoke immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Because both understood what this conversation meant. Finally, Clara stopped beside him. Elias looked up, waiting. The ranch suddenly felt very quiet. Then Clara said 4 words. I'll do it. Silence. The hammer slipped slightly in Elias's hand. Not much. Enough. Because despite everything, part of him had expected her to refuse. The ranch owner stood slowly, studying her face, making sure. You mean it? Clara nodded. Once. Firmly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. The decision had cost her an entire night of thought. Now it belonged to her. The rancher looked toward the horizon, then back toward her, and for the first time in weeks, some of the worry left his eyes. Not all of it. Some. That was enough. Unfortunately, the rest of Texas had opinions. Many opinions. And they arrived quickly. Very quickly. By noon, the story had spread beyond Red Hollow Ranch. By evening, neighboring ranches knew. By sunrise, the entire county seemed aware. Interesting. Very interesting. Because people who never visited the Boone Ranch suddenly became experts on Boone's marriage. The general store buzzed with conversation. The barber shop buzzed louder. The saloon nearly exploded. Everyone had something to say, almost none of it kind. One rancher laughed into his coffee. Boone finally lost his mind. Laughter followed. Another man smirked. Imagine inheriting a ranch and marrying the help. More laughter. Across town, a woman shook her head dramatically. There must not be another woman left in Texas. The joke spread, growing larger, crueler. With every retelling, Clara heard some of it. Not all. Enough. The words followed her through town, through the market, past the church, across Main Street, like shadows, always present, always waiting. The old nickname returned with new energy. Lot 18, Lot 18, Lot 18. The number seemed impossible to escape. One afternoon, two young women passed her outside the mercantile. One whispered, not quietly enough, "She's only marrying him for the land." The second laughed. "What land?" More laughter. Clara continued walking. Head high, back straight. The same way she'd walked through harder things. Much harder things. Still, the words hurt. Because being strong does not mean being unaffected. People often confuse the two. That evening, Samuel Reed found Elias repairing tack inside the barn. The foreman looked annoyed. Very annoyed. A dangerous condition for a man who already disliked fools. Samuel tossed a newspaper onto a workbench. The ranch owner glanced at it, then frowned. Someone had written about the marriage. Interesting. Very interesting. Because apparently gossip now counted as news. Samuel folded his arms. They won't stop. Elias returned to his work. I noticed. The foreman stared at him, waiting for anger, waiting for frustration. Instead, he found neither. The ranch owner simply kept working. Finally, Samuel asked, "Does it bother you?" Elias tightened his saddle strap, then shrugged. Not really. The answer surprised Samuel. Completely. The foreman blinked. What about Clara? Now that question mattered. The ranch owner paused. Because unlike gossip, that part concerned him. A lot. The following Sunday, the wedding took place. No orchestra. No decorations. No elaborate ceremony. Just a small gathering behind the county office. The judge, Samuel, two witnesses, and the Texas sky overhead. Nothing more. The simplicity suited both of them. Clara wore a plain blue dress. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Just clean, neat, respectable. The same could be said of her. Elias wore his best coat, though nobody would have called it fashionable. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. The judge read. The couple answered. Papers were signed. And suddenly it was done. Interesting. Very interesting. Because after weeks of gossip, the actual wedding felt almost peaceful. No applause followed. No celebration. No dramatic kiss. Just silence. Then life moved forward. As it usually does. The newly married couple rode back toward Red Hollow Ranch. Side by side. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. The agreement between them remained. Clear. Respect. Honesty. Partnership. Nothing more. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, the frontier rarely cared about plans. 3 days later, the sky changed. At first, nobody worried. Texas weather changed constantly. People were accustomed to it. Then the clouds disappeared completely. For days. Then weeks. The wind became hotter. The grass became thinner. The ponds shrank. The wells dropped lower. Interesting. Very interesting. Because experienced ranchers began noticing something troubling. The signs were familiar. Too familiar. One afternoon, Samuel stood beside a water trough. Frowning. The level had fallen again. Nearby cattle crowded around the remaining water. Restless. Uneasy. The foreman didn't like what he saw. Not one bit. Meanwhile, Clara stood near the north pasture, watching the land, listening, remembering. Something about the dry wind felt familiar. Very familiar. Because she'd seen conditions like this before. Years ago. Long before arriving at Red Hollow. And those memories carried a warning. A dangerous warning. That evening, the ranch gathered for supper. Conversation felt subdued. Workers exchanged concerned glances. Even the usual laughter seemed quieter. Elias noticed. So did Clara. Finally, Samuel spoke the words nobody wanted to hear. Drought. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. The kind every rancher understands. Because drought wasn't merely bad weather. It was survival, livelihood, life itself. The ranch owner looked toward the window. The sky beyond remained clear. Too clear. Then his eyes settled briefly on Clara. The woman said nothing. Not yet. But somewhere deep in her memory, a forgotten detail had begun returning. A detail that might save the ranch. Or change everything. The drought grew worse. Much worse. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And still no rain came. The Texas sky remained beautiful. Which was the problem? Ranchers don't trust beautiful skies during a drought. They trust clouds. And there weren't any. Across Red Hollow Ranch, the land slowly changed. Grass disappeared. Streams shrank. Dust replaced green. Even the cattle seemed quieter. As though they understood. Animals often do. One morning, Samuel Reed stood beside the main well. Looking down. Frowning. The water level had dropped again. The foreman didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The workers already knew. Everyone knew. Water was becoming a problem. A serious problem. By midday, the conversation spread through the ranch. Near the barns. Near the corrals. Inside the cookhouse. People whispered numbers. Days. Weeks. Estimates. Predictions. None sounded good. Meanwhile, Clara continued working. As always. She baked bread. Prepared meals. Organized supplies. Fixed problems before anyone noticed them. The same thing she'd done for years. Yet something had changed. Whenever she finished a task, she found herself looking north, toward the distant hills. Again, and again, and again. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the habit wasn't conscious. Not at first. It felt more like memory. A memory trying to return. One afternoon, Elias noticed. The ranch owner stood outside the barn, watching workers repair fencing. Then he noticed Clara staring toward the northern ridge. Again. The same direction. The same expression. Thinking. Remembering. Finally, he walked over. What are you looking at? Clara blinked. Apparently surprised. Then looked back toward the hills. I'm not sure. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people would have laughed. Elias didn't. Because she sounded honest. The woman folded her arms. Thinking. Then slowly spoke. When I was younger. A pause. My father worked near those hills. The rancher listened. Carefully. Clara continued. There used to be a spring. Silence. Not because the statement sounded important. Because it didn't. At least not yet. The woman frowned. Trying to remember details buried beneath years. A natural spring. Another pause. Or maybe a creek. The uncertainty frustrated her. Memories can be cruel that way. Especially old ones. Elias glanced toward the ridge. The distance looked considerable. Most ranchers avoided that area. Rocky terrain. Difficult access. Poor grazing land. Not much reason to visit. The rancher shrugged. Maybe it's gone. Clara nodded. Maybe. That seemed likely. Unfortunately. Still, the thought refused to disappear. That evening, she searched her memory again. While washing dishes. While sweeping floors. While preparing breakfast dough for the next morning. Always the same image. Rocks. Cottonwoods. Water. Interesting. Very interesting. Because memories usually fade. This one seemed determined to sharpen. The following day, the situation worsened. Another well slowed. Several cattle became weak. 2 calves died. The news spread quickly. Nobody panicked. Experienced ranchers rarely panic. They simply become quieter. More serious. The atmosphere across Red Hollow changed. People laughed less. Talked less. Smiled less. Even supper felt different. The workers gathered inside the cookhouse. Eating. Thinking. Worrying. Samuel finally broke the silence. We need rain. Nobody disagreed. Because obvious truths rarely require debate. Across the table, Elias stared into his coffee. The ranch owner looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Every problem seemed to arrive at once. The land dispute. The marriage gossip. The drought. The responsibility. People depended on him. Families depended on him. And now the ranch itself seemed to be slipping away. Clara watched him quietly. Then made a decision. A small one. But important. The next morning, she saddled a horse. Alone. Before sunrise. The ranch still slept. Only a few lanterns burned. The sky remained dark blue. Silent. Peaceful. The woman rode north. Toward the hills. Toward a memory. Toward something she wasn't entirely certain existed. Hours passed. The terrain grew rougher. Rockier. Steeper. Several times Clara almost turned back. Because logic argued against the trip. The drought had lasted months. If water existed, someone would have found it. Wouldn't they? Interesting. Very interesting. Because that assumption sounded reasonable. Yet something continued pulling her forward. Eventually, she reached the ridge. Then dismounted. The wind moved softly through scattered trees. The landscape felt strangely familiar. A feeling she couldn't explain. The woman walked. Slowly. Watching. Listening. Remembering. Then she saw it. A cluster of old cottonwoods. Large ones. Ancient ones. Interesting. Very interesting. Because cottonwoods rarely grow far from water. Not in Texas. Not in terrain this dry. Clara's heartbeat quickened. She moved closer. The ground changed beneath her boots. Subtle, but noticeable. Less brittle. Less dead. The woman knelt. Touched the soil. Then froze. Cool. Very cool. A long moment passed. Then another. Hope appeared. Dangerous hope. The kind people fear after disappointment. Clara stood, looking around carefully. The memory returned all at once. Her father. A wagon. A narrow stream. Hidden among rocks. Years ago. Many years ago. The woman moved faster now. Searching. Climbing. Following instinct. Following memory. Then suddenly she stopped. Completely. Because there it was. Almost invisible beneath brush and stone. A depression in the earth. Partially hidden. Forgotten. Abandoned. Yet unmistakable. Water. Not much. Not yet. Just a faint trickle emerging from beneath rock. Enough to survive. Enough to matter. Enough to change everything. Clara stared. Unable to move. Unable to speak. For a moment she simply listened. The sound was tiny. Almost nothing. A quiet whisper beneath the stone. Yet during a drought, it sounded like a miracle. The woman mounted her horse immediately. Then turned toward Red Hollow. The ride back felt shorter. Faster. Hope does that. By late afternoon, she reached the ranch. Dust covered her clothes. Her horse. Her face. Workers stared. Confused. Samuel approached first. Then Elias. The ranch owner studied her expression and immediately understood something. Not what. Something. Clara climbed down from the saddle. Breathing hard. The long ride had exhausted her. But her eyes were alive. More alive than they'd been in weeks. Elias stepped forward. What happened? The woman looked at him. Then at Samuel. Then toward the thirsty land surrounding them. And finally spoke. For words. Words that would soon change the future of Red Hollow Ranch. I think I found water. I think I found water. Silence followed. Complete silence. Not because nobody heard her. Because nobody wanted to believe her. Interesting. Very interesting. Hope can be dangerous. Especially during a drought. People become afraid of it. Afraid of disappointment. Afraid of believing. Samuel Reed was the first to speak. You what? Clara looked at him. Then repeated herself. Calmly. Carefully. I found a spring. The foreman blinked. Once. Then twice. Apparently waiting for the sentence to become less surprising. It didn't. Across the yard, several workers had stopped what they were doing. Listening. Watching. Trying to understand. Elias Boone stepped forward. The ranch owner studied Clara's face. Dust covered her clothes. Her boots. Her horse. The woman looked exhausted. But she didn't look mistaken. There was a difference. A very important difference. Finally Elias asked, Are you sure? Clara hesitated. Honesty mattered. Especially now. No. Interesting. Very interesting. Several workers frowned. The answer sounded wrong. Until she continued. I'm sure I found water. A pause. I'm not sure how much. That sounded more like Clara. Direct. Practical. Truthful. The ranch owner nodded. Then looked toward Samuel. The foreman already understood. Of course he did. Get the wagons. Everything changed. Immediately. Within an hour a group of ranch hands headed north. Tools filled the wagons. Shovels. Pickaxes. Barrels. Rope. Hope. Lots of hope. The ride felt longer than usual. Nobody spoke much. Every man was busy imagining the same thing. Failure. Or salvation. There seemed to be no middle ground. Late that afternoon they reached the ridge. Clara led them forward. Past the cottonwoods. Past the rocks. Toward the hidden depression. Then she stopped. Pointing. There. The workers stared. Confused. Because from a distance it looked like nothing. Just another patch of dry land. Samuel climbed down first. Sound. The worker froze. Everyone did. Then water appeared. At first only a trickle. Then more. Then more. The ground darkened. Mud formed. The tiny stream became something larger. Something real. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The men simply stared, because after months of drought, the sight felt almost impossible. Then Samuel laughed. A loud laugh. A relieved laugh. The kind that erupts from a man carrying too much worry. Several workers joined him. Others removed their hats. One older ranch hand wiped tears from his eyes, pretending it was sweat. Nobody corrected him. The spring wasn't enormous. It wasn't magical, but it was enough. Enough to save cattle. Enough to supply workers. Enough to keep Red Hollow alive. And sometimes enough is everything. The news reached the ranch before sunset. By morning it reached town. By afternoon it reached neighboring counties. Interesting. Very interesting. Because people who had spent weeks discussing Clara's marriage suddenly discovered a new topic. The woman who found water. The conversations changed. Slowly. At first people doubted. Then they verified. Then they accepted. The evidence sat in plain sight, flowing from the northern ridge. One rancher visited personally. Then another. Then another. All returned with the same story. The spring was real. The drought remained. But Red Hollow now had a chance. And that changed everything. The following weeks became the busiest in ranch history. Workers built channels, storage tanks, water troughs, pipelines. Everyone contributed, including Clara. Especially Clara. She organized schedules. Not for finding water. For helping his family receive extra supplies. Langford spoke. Nobody said a word. Not Samuel. Not Elias. Not even the workers standing nearby. The investor remained calm. Comfortable. Confident. The confidence of a man accustomed to hearing yes. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the offer was enormous. Large enough to erase debt. Large enough to secure a future. Large enough to tempt almost anyone. Victor smiled politely, then repeated the figure. Slowly, of course. The woman carried 2 cups of coffee. One for him. One for herself. Neither mentioned it. The gesture had become normal. The kind of thing people do after months of shared responsibility. She handed him a cup, then sat nearby. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Eventually, Elias spoke. Most ranchers would accept. Clara looked toward the horizon. The sky glowed red above the dry plains. Would you? The ranch owner didn't answer immediately, because he honestly didn't know. That bothered him. A lot. Victor's money could solve every problem. The land dispute. Future droughts. Financial uncertainty. Everything. At least on paper. Finally, Elias sighed. I keep thinking about the workers. Interesting. Very interesting. Because that was exactly what Clara had been thinking too. The ranch wasn't just land. It never had been. It was families. Children. Old people. Generations. People rarely appear in legal documents. Yet they're always the most important part. The following week, Victor returned. This time carrying contracts. Thick contracts. Official contracts. The investor seemed pleased. Almost certain, as though the decision had already been made. He met Elias inside the ranch office. Samuel attended. So did Clara. Victor placed the documents on the desk, then smiled. I've improved the offer. Interesting. Very interesting. Because apparently enormous wasn't enough. Now it was even larger. The investor pointed toward the papers. You'll never receive another opportunity like this. Perhaps he was right. That was the problem. The numbers looked incredible. Almost impossible. Samuel stared, then looked away. The temptation was obvious. The foreman wasn't greedy, just realistic. The money could protect everyone. Or so it appeared. Clara remained silent. Listening. Watching. Observing. The same way she always did. Then Victor made a mistake. A small mistake. The kind intelligent people often make when they underestimate someone. He looked toward Clara, then smiled politely. Too politely. You understand economics, Mrs. Boone? Interesting. Very interesting. The room became very quiet. Because everyone heard the implication. The investor had mistaken kindness for ignorance. A common error. A dangerous one. Clara met his gaze. Calmly. I understand people. Victor chuckled softly, as though indulging a child. Bad decision. Very bad decision. The woman folded her hands, then asked, what happens to the families? Silence. The investor blinked, apparently surprised. What families? Interesting. Not Clara. That alone revealed how much had changed. The woman looked across Red Hollow, toward the homes, the corrals, the workers already beginning another day. Then she answered, quietly, honestly, the same way she always did. If selling saves us. A pause. Do it. Silence. The ranch owner listened carefully. Then Clara finished. But if selling only saves us by sacrificing everyone else? She looked toward the rising sun. Then it's too expensive. The words lingered, long after she finished speaking. Because deep down, Elias Boone already knew she was right. And by the end of the week, the entire county would hear his answer. The answer came on a Saturday, just after noon. The town hall was full, completely full. Interesting, very interesting. Because most town meetings attracted little attention, this one attracted everyone. Farmers, ranchers, merchants, workers, families, even people who normally avoided public gatherings. The reason was simple. Everyone wanted to know what Elias Boone would do. The offer had become legendary. Every retelling made it larger. Every conversation made it more unbelievable. Some people thought he would sell. Others thought he wouldn't. Nobody knew. Not for certain. Victor Langford sat near the front, perfectly dressed, perfectly confident. The investor looked like a man expecting good news. Beside him rested a leather briefcase. Inside waited the contracts, signed or unsigned. Victor appeared unconcerned, because men who spend their lives buying things eventually begin believing everything has a price. The meeting began. Several local matters were discussed. Road repairs, water allocations, property disputes. Nobody cared. Not really. Everyone waited for one topic. Finally it arrived. The mayor cleared his throat, then looked toward Elias. Have you reached a decision? Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles across a room before something important happens. Elias Boone stood slowly. The ranch owner looked across the crowd, toward familiar faces, toward people who had shared droughts, floods, hard winters, hard years. Then his eyes settled briefly on Clara, standing quietly near the back, exactly where she preferred to be. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the woman who had saved the ranch still avoided attention. Some habits never leave. Elias looked forward again, then spoke. I appreciate the offer. Victor smiled. The room remained silent. The ranch owner continued. The money would solve many problems. Several people nodded. Because that was true. Absolutely true. The offer could change lives. Then Elias paused. A long pause. Long enough for anticipation to grow. Long enough for Victor's smile to widen. Then everything changed. I'm not selling. Silence exploded across the room. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victor's smile disappeared instantly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, the investor looked surprised. Genuinely surprised. Elias folded his hands behind his back, then continued. This ranch survived because people refused to quit. A pause. Not because of me. Another pause. Because of them. His eyes moved across the crowd. Workers. Families. Neighbors. Friends. People. The very people Victor never included in his calculations. The room listened carefully. Every word mattered. Then Elias looked directly toward Clara, and the entire town followed his gaze. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly everyone understood where this was going. The ranch owner nodded toward her. When the drought came, silence. I didn't save Red Hollow. Another pause. She did. The room turned completely toward Clara. The woman froze, apparently wishing she were somewhere else. Anywhere else. Public attention remained her least favorite thing. The ranch owner wasn't finished. When everyone else overlooked those hills, he pointed north, toward the spring. She remembered. The silence deepened. Because everyone knew the story now. The hidden water, the saved cattle, the surviving ranch, the families who still had homes because of it. Elias continued. When everyone else saw a housekeeper, his voice remained calm, steady. I saw someone who never stopped helping this ranch. Another pause. Even when this town gave her no reason to. That one landed. Hard. Several people lowered their eyes. Because they remembered. The jokes. The whispers. The laughter. The nickname. Lot 18. For the first time, many felt ashamed. As they should. Victor finally interrupted. His voice sounded sharp. Annoyed. You turned down a fortune because of sentiment? Interesting. Very interesting. The question revealed everything. Exactly everything. The room became colder. Elias slowly turned toward him, then smiled. A small smile. A peaceful smile. The kind worn by men who already know they made the correct choice. No. Silence. The ranch owner glanced toward the crowd, then toward Clara, then back to Victor. I turned it down because some things are worth more. The investor had no answer. Not a real one. Because people who measure everything in dollars rarely understand value. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Victor left town before sunset. His carriage rolled away beneath a cloud of dust. Nobody waved goodbye. Nobody seemed disappointed. Red Hollow remained Red Hollow. And that was enough. Weeks passed. Then months. Autumn arrived. Cooler winds crossed the plains. The drought finally broke. Rain returned. Gentle at first, then steady. The land slowly healed. Grass returned. Streams strengthened. The ranch flourished. Better than anyone expected. One afternoon the town gathered again. This time for celebration. Not business. The annual harvest festival. Children laughed. Music played. Food filled long wooden tables. The atmosphere felt warm. Alive. Hopeful. Near the center of town stood a covered object. Large. Wooden. Mysterious. People whispered about it all morning. Clara ignored it. Of course she did. She had work to do. Some things never changed. Eventually the mayor climbed onto a small platform. Smiling. The crowd gathered. Families moved closer. Workers from Red Hollow arrived together. Even Samuel looked unusually pleased. A dangerous sign. The mayor raised a hand, then addressed the crowd. Today we're honoring someone. Clara immediately became suspicious. Very suspicious. The crowd began smiling. That made things worse. Much worse. Then the cloth covering the wooden object was removed. Silence followed. Not shocked silence. Emotional silence. Because everyone could see it. A new sign. Beautifully carved. Simple. Elegant. The words were easy to read. Clara Whitmore, the woman who saved Red Hollow. For several seconds Clara couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Interesting. Very interesting. Because after years of being known by a number, the town had given her back her name. Her real name. Not Lot 18. Not a joke. Not a label. A name. The one her parents gave her. The one she thought people had forgotten. Tears appeared. Quietly. Without warning. Across the crowd several others wiped their eyes too. Including Samuel. Though he pretended otherwise. Elias stepped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally Clara whispered, "You didn't have to do this." The ranch owner smiled. Softly. Yes. A pause. We did. The autumn wind moved across the festival. Children laughed nearby. Music drifted through town. Life continued. Beautifully. And for the first time in many years, Clara Whitmore understood something. She had never needed a new identity. She had never needed permission to matter. She had always possessed dignity. The world had simply taken too long to recognize it. They once called her Lot 18, until she reminded them that a human soul cannot be reduced to a number. And long after the drought ended, long after the laughter disappeared, long after the seasons changed, the land remembered her name.